最近呢，在互联网上看到流传了一个视频，讲的是上海现在慢慢取消了小学的英语期末考试。现在看趋势好像是在为英语学习降温呢，说大家不用学习英语了，因为现在的人工智能啊、翻译啊准确率已经达到了90%以上，完全可以用人工智能来代替人的那种翻译。所以说呢，大家只要把中文学好了就行了。我现在看好像有很多人有不同的观点什么的哈。中国有一个成语叫过犹不及和矫枉过正，什么东西太多和太少其实也都不是很好的。
对，
过去中国人学英语把大把的时间用来学英语，花费了很多时间。现在呢，就是民族啊、自信啊还是自强啊，这个观念越来越强了，但是呢也不能说排斥学外语。我觉得这也是一个了解外面世界的特别重要的一个手段吧。因为你人工智能再怎么学的话，不是你个人来学，翻译是能够把一些想表达的东西给你翻译出来，但是
not always. There's a lot of things that are not translatable, which is why I like to learn languages. I think it's you reading a translation of a work versus reading the original work in its original language is very different. It's very, very different.
对，很多东西你去通过别人翻译的话，就好像有一种像别人吃过、嚼过的东西喂给你吃的那种感觉。
Yeah, it's filtered and a lot of times it's going to be edited to fit the viewpoint of the person who's editing it.
在翻译的时候会加入自己的一些观点，因为很多的语言都有不同的解释嘛。你这样理解是这样的解释，像英文很多时候就是像咱们俩做这种视频吧，很多时候我把你的话翻译，我其实是尽可能的去尊重你的表达，因为我很了解你嘛。
I like being exposed to different cultures. I think I really enjoy languages. I think there's something really beautiful in learning languages of a culture and really kind of learning pieces of culture that has to do with the languages and seeing how it's developed over time. Like just seeing how English became English is really interesting to me because people always make the joke that English isn't even a language. It's like 4 languages stacked together in a trench coat pretending to be a language, which is really funny to me because it's kind of true. We steal a lot of words. Well, not steal, but it's a lot of loan words. It's called loan words. Yeah. So in English, we have the word rendezvous, which is derived from French. It is a French word. We just don't pronounce it the way the French do. We say croissant. It's a French word. It's a French pastry. So like we say tortilla. That's a Spanish word. I have a lot of loan words in English, and it's kind of funny because I just think it's really interesting that there's so many like commonplace words that are from other languages that a lot of people don't realize aren't in English. Like why do we pronounce phone, which is spelled P-H-O-N-E, the PH sound as an F sound? It's because I think it's French or Viking languages. It's one of those.
也是借用的。
Yeah. So it's like a bunch of languages combined. Like for example, English is considered a Germanic language with Anglo-Saxon roots, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the etymology of English. But it's like a whole bunch of different languages combined to make English, which is why I think it's like such a weird language. It doesn't make sense a lot of the time.
咱们对门的邻居嘛，那个是瑞斯，他是英语老师嘛，当时他就说了，说英语是最难学的一门语言。
Totally agree. I've had a lot of people who don't speak English as like their first language. Sometimes they ask me like, why is it this way instead of that way? And I can't give them an answer because in English there are rules, but we don't follow them most of the time. One of the things that I learned in grade school was I before E except after C. So in words like believe, where do you put the I and where do you put the E? So it's I before E, but not after C, because after C, sometimes like perceive, it's C-E-I. But then, so that's a rule. But then you have words like neighbor, which the E comes before the I, but it starts with an N, not a C. So it doesn't make any sense. There's so many rules, but none of it follow. Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. It's so hard to explain and so hard to learn.
其实我们之前学英语语法的时候，后面 to 后面要加动词的原形什么的 ，have to do something。你肯定是 have to do， 而不是 doing or 什么的。
Oh, yeah, not like having to doing.
对，
yeah.
像那个 looking forward to。seeing you， 这就不规律了，是吧？
Yeah, see, as someone who's like has spoken English for pretty much all my life, I'm like, yeah, this just sounds right. I think for me, the best advice I give someone who's learning English is like, you just have to learn it to the point where even if you don't know the rules, it just doesn't sound right, so you don't say it. Like, oh, I having to do this tomorrow just doesn't sound right. It doesn't roll off the tongue. But then again, you can't really teach somebody who like doesn't understand the language. So like, because to them they both sound wrong.
对对。
So I don't know. It just oftentimes doesn't really make any sense.
对，我今天一个小伙子给我留言说，他每天要刷英语卷子，因为他的听和说都不行，但读和写还行。我说是不是语言的一个过程应该是听说读写的过程啊？听是最容易的，写是最难的。
我觉得这是 mother language 和学second language 对不一样，因为我说中文可以，我听中文也可以，但是写字和读我觉得还是有点差。但是我学什么德语、Korean、Spanish, I think that reading is really easy because that's usually what you start with. And then listening is also pretty easy because you can kind of understand and pick out words. I think that talking is definitely really hard when you're learning a new language because you have to, on the spot, kind of translate it in your head. Like, oh, this is what I want to say. Okay, so how do I formulate that in this new language? And a lot of times, different languages have different structures. So, for example, in Korean, you put the subject first. So instead of like, I eat strawberries, they might say strawberries I eat. So it's like a different structure. So in your brain, you have to flip all of it in addition to translating. So talking, in my opinion, from my experience, is like the most difficult thing in learning a second language. I think I mean, obviously everyone has different experiences, but for me, I think that that's what makes a lot of sense. I was probably 14 when I heard my friend talk about her second cousin once removed, and I remember asking her, removed? Like, who removed them? What do you mean by removed? Like, because in my head, I was 14. I was like, removed? Like, did they get kicked out of the family? So they're a second cousin? Like, they were your cousin, but then they got downgraded to your second cousin, and then they got kicked out of the family, so it's once removed? It doesn't make any sense to me at all.
对，英文的这个称呼确实是挺迷惑的啊。像中文里面有很多的称呼嘛，就像同样是女性的这边亲戚，就姑姑、阿姨、舅妈，什么各种各样的，都是有特定的词来定义他们。而英文里面的一个那个 uncle auntie， 就是无论是舅舅、叔叔、伯伯，所有的这个 uncle
和 I think that's quite easy. I prefer it that way, to be honest. Because then you can just specify like, oh, my aunt on my mom's side. You don't have to memorize a whole new word for it. But then you have things like fourth cousin 3 times removed, and you're like, what? How are you related? What is the connection?
他这个就属于那种中国叫远房亲戚。
distant relationship.
对，你像我的哥哥的孩子，就是哥哥，
对，慢点，
就是舅舅的儿子，
舅舅的儿子的，
就哥哥。
我的
你和哥哥俩，
我和哥哥，
咱俩说叫哥哥，从英文的角度讲叫 cousin。对，用中文确切的说是表哥。哥哥的如果有孩子的话，
好，
和你的孩子的话，
和我的，他们俩，不是跟我，
不是他们俩之间呢，就属于那种，
他们俩是 second cousins 对吧？
对 ，second cousin。
好，
然后呢，哥哥的孩子跟你就属于 first cousin once removed。second
cousin once removed, right?
因为你们俩是差辈儿的嘛。
But why is it first cousin? Why is it not second cousin once removed?
但你们俩，你和哥哥俩是 first cousin 呢。
Yeah, but I'm not first cousins with his kid.
但是你因为你是 first cousin， 和他的孩子已经显示出来了，你们俩是差辈儿的，就是用那个 once removed。
I will never understand this. There's no use in explaining this to me.
所以说这个东西确实是挺 confused.
I have a headache already. But I think it's also funny that in English we have like so many. So 你说的什么姑姑和阿姨和那些东西都是不一样的。In English, they do that, but with like animals. I for the longest time thought that like different names for animals meant different animals, but like a cow is like the female version of that animal, but the male version is called a bull. And I thought those were two different animals, but they're just male and female of the same species. And then they called a baby a calf. And this was just the most confusing thing ever. And then they call them different things when they like kill them to eat them kind of thing. So like beef versus venison versus something else, and they're all the same thing. I don't understand.
就是很奇怪的是，动物的是年老的、年幼的哈，都有不同的称呼，什么雌性的、雄性的都有不同的称呼，但这种叔叔阿姨什么的，就一个词都概括了。
Yeah. Removed is so funny. Like, how do you explain to your child, like, oh, this is your third cousin twice removed, and then they're looking like removed.
Twice.
Who got like removed twice? Oh my god.
就是不同的语言，你了解其实有它有趣的地方的。像英文里面那个 I， 就是说我的那个 I， 它在任何的语境里面都是大写的嘛，就属于你从这个文化的角度讲的，说英文的这个文化崇尚就是自我嘛。自己永远是
I never thought about that.
Very individual 的那种感觉。
I never thought about that. That makes a lot of sense, though.
对，中国人讲究的 humble 嘛，就是很谦虚的，自我是小的，但集体是大的。
That's interesting. I never noticed anything about that.
咱俩又回到前面的说那个中国的新闻吧，我是觉得语言学习是有必要的，但是不能是强迫性的。
Yeah. I think in the U.S. we do a really bad job of teaching languages, because I think that you should start young. I think you should start young because if you don't start young, then learning languages is really hard. Really, really hard. Because we had an optional Spanish class in middle school, and only I think like 20 of us were in that class, and it was only one class. There were like 20 something of us who took Spanish 1. 8th grade, I think it was 8th grade.
也是从初中开始学的。
That's an option. And in high school, we are required to take 2 years of a language. But by the time you're 16, if you're trying to learn a whole new language, first of all, your pronunciation is probably going to be really bad because there's a lot of sounds that are present in other languages that are not present in English. For example, the rolling R, like the R sound. It's not really common. That's very common in Spanish and Italian and Portuguese. And it's also even in Korean, the R sound, like the rolling R. But it's not in English. So a lot of people don't know how to roll their R's because they don't speak that language. But when you start little, you can like teach it. I always tell everyone this really funny story of when I watch High School Musical and one of the girls in a song goes and I really wanted to learn how to do it. So when I was walking to school that day after watching High School Musical at night, I practiced by myself for like 45 minutes until I could do it.
我都做不了这个。
So, but I'm saying like if I hadn't watched High School Musical and if I hadn't wanted to learn, I wouldn't have been able to roll my R's. So
对，就
like
不同的语言，那个 R 那个 rolling 的位置还是不一样
in
的。
German and in French, it's in the back of the throat. It's a sound, like gargling when you gargle water, like like rot, yeah, and roja.
Spanish is different, huh?
Yeah, Spanish. So the color red in Spanish is roja.
是前面的。
Yeah, it's the rolling the tongue, and in German, the color red is rot. It's in the back of the throat, like Bratwurst. It's all in the back of the throat. So it is a different like position of like the thing. So like if you don't grow up saying it, you're not going to be able to say it right, or it's like less of a chance that you say it right. So I think that like language learning should really start when you're young, like in kindergarten. Right now they have a lot of dual language kindergarten programs. So it's usually like Spanish and English or like French and English, but a lot of people have been doing this thing where they hire babysitters who are bilingual, and so their babysitters talk to them and try to teach them, like, or like in-house nannies or like tutors who come over and teach their kids at a young age, because I think now it's becoming more important in the US that their kids grow up bilingual.
对，大家都意识到了这个地球是一个村庄了，想发展自己，有时候需要了解别人，才能够好的去沟通吧。其实沟通也是很重要的，让别人真正去了解你、理解你，而不是说指望着一个翻译软件来为你做这件事情。
Yeah, I just think that it's really irreplaceable. Like language is a really
这个话题我们今
irreplaceable
天就聊
aspect
到
of
这儿。
human life,
欢迎
and
大
that
家
if you
关注
really
我的
wanted to
频道。
understand
喜欢我们节目
somebody
的朋
else
友
and you
也
really
欢
want to
迎
like
点赞、
learn more
转发
about the
和
world,
留
one of
言。
the best ways
谢
to do
谢。
that is not by reading history books, but by learning their languages. Because by learning languages, you can kind of see the nuances in their culture, what they emphasize.
对对。
Like for example, in Japanese and Korean, they emphasize politeness and like respect for people. So and that's reflected in their language structure
对。
because there's different tiers of politeness
对。
that you abide by. And I think that that's you, if you don't learn the language, then you wouldn't know these types of things.
对，其实学语言吧也是不同的追求，有的人可能去往文科方向发展的话，他会去追求这样。像理工科，像哥哥他们这边的话，可能对这种语言的那种需求吧，可能就会弱一些。所以很多东西你要把这个用中文说叫一刀切。
Yeah, I think people should be given the choice to choose, and I think that if possible, people should choose to do it because it definitely. I've never heard anyone say like, "I learned this language and it hurt me."
但是学语言要花费很多时间的。
Yes.
这就是可能说的所谓的伤害吧，可能就是花费了很多时间。你把学习其他的时间用在这上面，而且呢，学语言有的时候反馈也不是那么及时的，
Yeah.
因为它是有一个从量变到质变的过程。在这个过程当中，你需要很多的耐心，花费很多时间。
Yeah.
这个可能是很多人做不到的。
Yeah, something that I think would also help a lot of people who want to learn languages in general is learning languages that are similar to ones that you already know. So if you know English right now, it might be easy to learn Spanish because there's a lot of loan words. Once you learn Spanish, it might be easy to learn Italian. Once you get Italian, maybe move to French.
这为什么欧洲人都很多的
Yeah,
语言？
well, that and also the fact that they're in countries that are surrounded by other countries,
有
by
机
people
会
who
练习
speak
用。
different languages. Yeah.
对，这像美国的，咱之前说那笑话嘛哈，说会2种语言的 bilingual 哈，学3种语言的 trilingual，会说1种语言的是 American。
Well, that's also because, Mom, in California, we drive 10 hours in either direction. You're still in California.
对。
It's not even like you go to another state. You're in California still.
在美国很多人不会说外国语，除了那种外来移民
Yeah.
美国本地人很少会说外语的，也造就了美国人那种自大的性格吧，
对。
觉得你都应该说我的语言，觉得英语是世界上第一语言。
There's been stories of people who go to other countries and are like surprised when they don't talk in English.
对。
And it's like you're not in an English-speaking country.
对。
You shouldn't be surprised.
对，很多人是 very narrow-minded 的。
Yeah.